Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And thus far in this 2033 season, we've done a pretty good job continuing to save the A's. A 49-34 record, has a second in the AL West, 2.5 behind Texas. But we are a game and a half above the final wild card spot in the American League, and we are 7 games away from being out of the playoffs, just past the midway point of the season. So we're in pretty good shape. We're ranked 7th out of 30 in the latest power rankings. We're doing pretty well with our 3 goals for this season. Did our midseason review in the last episode when we talked about some of the things that we might be looking at in the trade market over the next month or so as we try to position this team to remain competitive this year, hopefully get to the playoffs for the 4th time in 5 seasons, and also position this team well for the future. And before we get started in this episode, which is going to be a relatively brief one, we're only going to sim 10 days ahead to draft day on July 11th, and then take a look at the options available to us with our first round pick before we finish the episode. So before we get to the little bit of simulation and action that we're going to have, I just want to kind of regroup on a couple of comments to our last couple episodes and take a look at a few players that have been highlighted by some of our loyal viewers, also known as our worldwide scouting department. We almost made a trade in the last episode for the young outfielder Elliot Pizza Bonello, and decided to go in a little bit different direction, bringing the right-hander Mr. Morton onto our team. But Bonello, although he's fragile physically, is still a guy that we have our eye on. He's been a pretty solid guy for Cleveland this year. I don't feel like we need that lefty power bat right now, even though we did recently trade away Xavier Isaac in the deal that got us the right-handed batting Mr. Morton. We still have the left-handed hitters Kyle Manzardo, Colt Keith, and Bobby Cabral right in the middle of our lineup. So Bonello, to me, would be a luxury to have this year. But given that Manzardo is likely one and done with us, we're going to kind of follow the advice of YME943 and some other viewers who were definitely intrigued by Mr. Bonello. Keep an eye on him. Certainly could be someone that we look to trade for in this offseason. Actually, it's interesting that we've got nobody who makes the deal work right now. So it seems like with Bonello's good production that his price has gone up significantly. Also, taking a look at the standings, I was thinking maybe Cleveland was in contention and that's why they wouldn't want to get rid of him, but they're actually having a pretty brutal season. So unfortunately, it looks like the price for Bonello has gone up significantly over the past month since we made that trade for Morton while also looking at Bonello. We'll keep an eye on for him, but I think it's less likely than we may have hoped that we'll be able to do anything for him either now or into the future. We took a brief look at the trade block at the end of the last episode, and subsequent to that episode, the notorious KEV identified a guy that we could potentially look at in the future, and that's the veteran infielder Andres Gimenez. He is in the final year of his contract with the Padres, although the Nationals are retaining 80% of that contract. So it wouldn't be too expensive to bring him on board. He's got some things going for him. He's a popular player, could give us a boost with attendance. He's also got some pretty positive personality traits. He's versatile defensively, although he's not particularly adept defensively. The issue is that the bat is pretty bad at this point with a 61 WRC plus, and he's been below replacement level this year. I don't feel like he's the answer for us right now, but if we were to have some more injuries in the infield over the next month or so, he certainly could be in the mix of someone that we might consider bringing on board to give us a little more infield depth as we try to guide this team back into the playoffs. And turning now from potential trade targets to guys who are on our team right now. We mentioned in the last episode how we did sign Levi Sterling to that extension, and both Fake Name and Kevin McDowell brought up potentially using him in the development lab this offseason to try to either improve his ability to keep the ball in the park and or his control. Given that he'll be 27 by this offseason and he's not incredibly smart, and outside of his stuff and potentially improving that a bit, it doesn't seem like there's any obvious areas for us to exploit a difference in terms of his current and potential ratings. I don't know that the likelihood of success for him in the development lab is going to be particularly high. That said, given the fact that we have now locked him up to an 8-year, $29 million deal, and that particularly an increase in his ability to keep the ball in the park or his control could go a decent way towards turning that from a contract that we think will be pretty good into maybe a borderline very good contract. Still intend to probably use a development lab spot on him this upcoming off season. If it's successful, then maybe we double up a year from now and do it once again. If it's unsuccessful, maybe we just kind of accept that Sterling is what he is. But what he is right now seems to be a respectable major league pitcher, and we still hope that he'll get a little bit better with some more experience. And the last thing that I want to mention from comments to the past episode is R.J. Cope. And Blade Staff brought up a pretty interesting question about whether we had considered using R.J. Cope as a two-way player. And that question is really funny to me because the third-round pick from 2026 has been a two-way player throughout his career with us in the minor leagues. And after spring training this year, when we finally promoted him to the major league roster, I had clicked off the two-way player for Cope. You can see his contact is below average and his avoid strikeout rating is well below average. His fielding ratings, particularly in the infield, are bad, and even his defensive ratings in the outfield are mediocre. And he's also fragile physically, so I kind of felt like having him as a two-way guy might just be a little too much pressure on a body that doesn't necessarily seem ready for the long-term rigors of use as a two-way player. That being said, he does have a special skill in his ability to hit home runs, and particularly against right-handed pitching, although he's going to still strike out a ton and still not make a ton of contact. We do think he can probably luck into an occasional home run. Over the course of his minor league career, he, as I mentioned, we've used him primarily as a pitcher, but we've given him a chance to try to develop his hitting skills over the years, and it hasn't gone that well. 207 career hitter, 89 career WRC plus in the minors with 368 strikeouts and only 66 walks in 828 at-bats. So those are the negatives. The positives, though, in those 828 at-bats, he does have 35 doubles and 45 home runs. So as we talked about, he can hit the ball out of the park. I am going to click him back on as a two-way player. At the very least, if we get into a desperate situation in a extra inning game, maybe Cope will get the occasional at-bat, and who knows, maybe he can luck into a game-winning home run for us at some point. I certainly am not expecting him to be a difference maker. And if it's a situation where the manager decides to be using him frequently and he's batting a $137, we might click that off again. But just for the fun of it, going to kind of engage with what Bladestaff brought up and at least see what R.J. Cope can from time to time do as a hitter, as a major leaguer. Not expecting too much, but he probably can hit the occasional home run for us. And for those of you who were wondering, I did go back in and revise a few of his batting strategy settings to better fit what I would like to do with a player with his very unique skill set. So we will see what Cope can do for us at the plate. Thus far, we've been pleased with what he's done on the mound for us in the first 28 1/3 innings of his major league career. And after 3 straight really good months to start the season, July not off to a really good start. We were swept on the road in Toronto, and then we split a 2-game series in Houston before splitting a 2-game series at home against Kansas City. So a 3-6 start to the month for our Oakland A's has us, as of July 11th, dropping to 7.5 behind the surging Rangers in the AL West. And we're now tied for the final 2 wildcard spots in the American League with the White Sox. We're still up 5 on the Astros, so certainly not in a tenuous position as far as potentially making the playoffs. But certainly would hope that we play a little better between now and the All-Star game. We've got 4 games at home against Seattle and then 3 at home against those White Sox before we make it to the break for the Midsummer Classic. But before we get to that Midsummer Classic, we've got to finish up this episode. And 2 things that we're going to do before we finish up the episode. One is going to be very quick. We are just going to check in on Mr. R.J. Cope and see whether he's had at-bat at all at the major league level, and he still has not, so we haven't used him anywhere besides a pitcher. I think our manager is showing a fair amount of discretion in his usage, given that he's pretty useful as a reliever for us, and not necessarily sure that he'll be able to do much of anything interesting for us as a hitter or a fielder. As we've mentioned in the past, we're going to be picking 21st overall this year in the 2033 first-year player draft. So we are going to go ahead, sim through those first 20 selections, and then take a initial look at who's available for us with the 21st pick. As always, it's helpful to hear the thoughts of anyone who's willing to give us an opinion on which direction we should go. And next episode, we'll obviously do the draft and get to the All-Star break and probably think more seriously about the trade market and what, if anything, we can do to help ensure that this now struggling team still is going to be in the playoffs come October. So we will get the draft underway. The Boston Red Sox are actually on the clock with the first pick in the draft. We'll auto-sim up to our pick in Oakland, and looks like there's a few interesting pitchers available, mainly high schoolers, it looks like, at least as far as the guys who have a higher potential ceiling. Mike Carbone, a reliever, looks like he may be one of the further along college players, but I don't think we're going to take a reliever out of the University of Maine with our first pick in the draft this year. Jonathan Nieswanger out of Purdue, Another guy who's a reliever, he's a little bit more interesting to me, but I still don't think that's a direction that we would go in the first round either. Doug Weiss, I know some of you really like these college players out of Austin Peay. Another reliever, certainly looks like he could be a useful major league arm, but I tend to think I'll go with someone with a higher ceiling if we do end up thinking about a pitcher at the top of this draft. The three who certainly stand out, at least according to our scout, are Eric Wilcox, 18-year-old lefty out of Fresno, California, committed to TCU. We think his stuff, his movement and control could all be above average. He's got a lot of work to do on several of those components: his stuff, his ability to keep the ball in the park, and his control. Is a guy who potentially could have a 6-pitch arsenal if everything went well. It looks like he's going to have an average fastball, but building off of that fastball, he could have a lot of other things, including a potentially borderline exceptional curveball. Ground ball tendencies, good stamina, good at holding runners, high adaptability and intelligence. Not a horrible guy for a 21st overall pick, but certainly hoping there might be someone more interesting to me. Chris O'Donnell, another high school pitcher, Skates O'Donnell out of Sanford, Florida, also normal in terms of his injury proneness. Looks like his stuff could be borderline excellent with plus movement, control the potential issue. He's got a fastball, a sinker, and a circle change that aren't too far off major league quality right now. Also potentially could have a decent slider and a nice changeup if he fully develops. The stamina is borderline for a starter, but certainly could work in the context of all the pitches he has. A few of his personality traits are not quite so favorable, but the high financial ambition and the low loyalty are probably the two that I'm most willing to suck it up and accept for a player. He does have high adaptability that also goes with low leadership. So another guy who's not a perfect prospect, but not someone that I'd rule out entirely either. Doug Kelly has the highest ceiling, according to our scout. We think if everything went well, he could have 70 stuff, 60 movement, and 75 control. So a pretty impressive arsenal if all goes well for the Calhoun, Georgia native who's committed to Oral Roberts University. Looks like at best he's got a 3-pitch arsenal, so that's a little bit of a concern. We think his change and his sinker could both be well above average. I think his slider is more of an average pitch. Interesting that a sinker slash changeup slash slider arsenal is a little bit unique, I would think. He's a ground ball pitcher, throws in the low 90s. Okay stamina, not particularly good at holding on runners, not the smartest gentleman in the world. So I think these 3 pitching prospects are interesting, but I am certainly not in love with any of them. Hitting-wise, it's also not the deepest pool available at this point. We'll look at the guys who we think are 4-star or higher potential who are left. Second baseman Ernesto Rivera, pretty well balanced bat that looks like it can be a little above average in everything. He's a good bunter, not much of a fielder, has low work ethic, probably not the direction we'd go. Eddie Blanchard, another infielder, like the potential power with him. Another guy whose glove is okay at best. Does have some positive personality traits, particularly the adaptability and the intelligence. Not all that fast. Free fall Blanchard is a switch hitter. I like him more than Rivera, but I'm not in love with him. Zach Almonte, a third baseman. Another guy who pretty uninspiring in terms of his infield ratings, but another guy whose bat is a good solid bat if it fully develops. Likely, since most players don't fully develop, will be a borderline interesting major league bat for Scorpion Almonte. The two highest regarded prospects, at least in terms of their potential, according to our scout, are Butch Wall and Josh Huggins. But there's only 3.5 star guys left, so I'll take a look at them too. Center fielder Ken Hanna, basically just a one-dimensional home run hitter, listed as a center fielder, but really more of a borderline corner outfielder. He's 6'2". He probably could play a competent first base also. Andres Castaneda, a right fielder, pretty good contact, kind of average-ish in all the others if he fully develops. Probably is one of the better personalities of the guys that we've looked at. Another guy who's more of a corner outfield first base type, though, when all is said and done. And Jim Bessler, a first baseman, above average contact and power if he fully develops. Not much speed, not a good bunter, not really that good defensively, but he is 6'8", so certainly could be a more than competent first baseman, but I don't think I would play him anywhere except first base or DH. So honestly, after looking at this crew, I'm really hoping that a Butch Wall or a Josh Huggins jumps out to me and also to the viewers potentially as a clear-cut way to go. Center fielder Butch Wall, not a really good contact hitter and looks like he's going to strike out a lot. Does potentially have off-the-charts home run power, really good gap power, and a potentially really good eye. Corner outfield / first base is what he is defensively. Speed is kind of average. Not the smartest guy in the world. I think he's one of the more interesting guys out there, but I'm not going to pound the table saying I've got to get him. Josh Huggins is probably going to have a pretty interesting profile, but he's got a couple of quirky personality traits, but he's also got some things that are positive. Huggins with the high adaptability and work ethic, the low leadership and intelligence. So he is a +2 and a -2 in the 4 traits that I care about the most. Another guy who looks like a corner outfield, very borderline first base type, really more of a corner outfielder DH guy. Average speed. We think his contact could be above average. His gap power and his eye also above average with really good home run power. So Matchbox Huggins, another guy who's an interesting prospect. I can't say that there's anyone I'm really in love with. We'll see if maybe there's like a 3-star prospect from college who's a little further along in terms of their current ratings. And honestly, it doesn't look like there's a lot out there. Left fielder Eddie Savage looks like a guy out of Lander University. I think I'd want someone with a little more upside with the first round pick, although haven't necessarily seen a ton of guys like that in the ones that we've looked through. Ronnie Gooley, another 21-year-old out of the Wentworth Institute of Technology. Poor competition level there. I'm assuming that's a D3 or NAIA or kind of school. I don't know anything about it. Looking at his profile, that is not interesting at all to me for a first-round pick. Couple other college guys. Nate Bird, a left fielder. Probably the most interesting of the college guys coming out of Tennessee, but doesn't really excite me. And then Julio Almendarez. Decent speed. Can play a number of positions defensively. Not looking for a lot of money. The bat is fine if it fully develops, but not particularly exciting. But he was a 300 hitter this past year at BYU. I tend to think the college options with a little bit of potential aren't that inspiring. When we look at overall ratings, a couple other guys who are a little further along, Alec Dubois, meh, and Hidetaro Ogata, pretty solid defensive catcher. Question, particularly given he's almost 21 years old, is whether he's going to really ever hit enough to be a useful major leaguer. But at least he brings something really strong to the table with that strong blocking and framing ability. So not necessarily a draft that I am incredibly excited about. Would love thoughts from viewers. We'll see what our scouting director recommends. Not surprisingly, he recommends the guy that he thinks is a 5-star ceiling in Matchbox Huggins. I do like the fact that if everything goes well, he's a little bit above average in everything offensively with potentially great home run power. The speed is meh. The defense is meh. And honestly, overall, the personality is meh. But it might be a meh kind of year. If we were to go with a pitcher, recommends Minor Kelly. Not surprisingly, also the guy that he thinks is 5-star potential there. I don't love that he's only going to be a 3-pitch guy, and the third pitch of his is likely just an average-ish kind of pitch. I don't love that he's not great at holding on runners, and his stamina is unexceptional. Got a lot of work to do in his control, but you can probably say that about most high schoolers. He's also almost 19 years old, so definitely a little older for a guy that's just out of high school as well. It's going to be an interesting decision for me. Definitely not anyone that I am in love with. You know, we talked earlier about Niswanger. He's kind of the furthest along of the college pitchers. He looks like a guy who could certainly be a good major league right-handed reliever. And he's also a guy who could help us in the not too distant future. Not a lot of stamina, but he's good at holding on runners. Throws in the mid to high 90s with extreme ground ball tendencies, high adaptability and intelligence. There are certainly things to like about Jonathan Niswanger, including his nickname Swampy, even though he's from Illinois and he went to Purdue. I generally would think someone would have the nickname Swampy if they're more from Florida or somewhere else in the Southeast, but I'm sure there's swamps somewhere in Illinois and Indiana. Wook Bradford, 17-year-old, whose overall rating is pretty good. But he's really a reliever, although he has a potential third pitch with that forkball. Only 30 stamina, does have some positive personality traits. Just is not the most exciting draft in the world to me. I'm going to spend some more time on it offline. Maybe, hopefully, I'll find something more interesting to do, or I'll get a little more convicted about which direction to go. If any of you have strong opinions about the players that we've looked at, would love to hear those as well, because I don't have a lot of conviction here, but admittedly I've only spent the last 15 minutes or so that we've been talking about this draft thinking about it at this point. And between now and the next episode, I'll spend a lot more time trying to figure out which direction we're going to go, not just in the first round, but hopefully in a well thought out strategy for the entire draft to ensure that some of the guys we kind of like might be around for us in the second and third rounds as well. And we will tackle that draft in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.